Perfect Dad by David Tensen. You didn't have a perfect dad, because such a man does not exist, because such a child does not exist. And every dad was once the child of an imperfect man who was also once a child. No, there is no excuse for abuse, but there is room for growth, and it never all happens in one man. It's generational, incremental, situational, environmental, accidental, and intentional. Dads, if you're holding onto shame and regret, what-ifs and oh shits, let it go. Forgive yourself. Be gracious to you. Your sins have most likely punished you enough. No need to beat yourself up more. And children, adult children reading this, let's be adults and let it go. Acknowledge the effort, seek the gold. Accept the failings of your imperfect parent and forgive him. For in doing so, you can accept your failings and find freedom to fail again into a better future. The morning I wrote this, I was late into the office. I have 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. The 2 sons are a couple years apart. One of them's 8, the other 10, and a 14-year-old girl. And I love my children deeply. And I try really hard to be a good dad. I'm intentional about it as much as I can. I've written about it, I've spoken about it, and if you spend years sitting with people working through father wounds, you start to get a clear idea on what the onflow and the effect of poor parenting form looks like in later years and where our kids can end up in their adult years. And so I'm particularly hypervigilant sometimes on the things that I do. This morning that I was late into work, I helped get the kids into the car and get them ready as I usually do. And Natalie was taking them to school, and just as the boys were getting into the car, they got into a fight. Now, at the time of recording this, and thankfully it's changed a bit, my 10-year-old son would basically resolve an argument with a punch or a slap of his brother or sister, and it didn't matter how many times I talked to him about it. It's just where he went. He would get frustrated and he would punch or slap, and it's not something that we tolerate. I'm not a smacking dad. I am not a firm believer at all in corporal punishment. And by that I mean, smacking, spanking, and any of those things in excess at all. I didn't get a lot of that as a child, and I just believe in a non-violent lifestyle. I believe, that's a major part of Jesus's message, to put an end to violence. And so that, for me, starts at home, and that culture starts within the family. And so I know boys have got to wrestle and they've got to fight, but this particular morning we were running late, and pressure was high, and there was this moment where my son got into this argument with his brother, and he punched him in the arm, and instantly his younger sibling was in tears and screamed, and in less than a second I responded by punching my own son in the arm, nice and hard, a good hard whack. Nothing like I'd punch an adult with, but I wanted him to feel what his brother was feeling, because his brother is never going to be able to punch back in the same strength, and he doesn't respond like that. And at that moment, I felt like the worst dad in the world. And if you're a dad listening to this, you may know what this feels like, those moments where you are so not proud of your response, where the pressure's high and the pressure's on, and your margin for just getting kids to school and to do something that they've done hundreds of times, just get in the car, don't fight, get to school. And my resolve, in an instant, my response was to punch my son in the arm. And that wasn't helping. Instantly, there was this wince and tears in his eyes. And if I remember right, he said something like, "I hate you." Or there was just this look on his eyes of absolute, like, "I'm not even talking to you." And instantly I moved to, "I see you, son, have a good day, I'm sorry." But he wouldn't even talk to me. He just slammed the door in my face. And I know I'd screwed up. Now, my wife didn't say anything and no one else said anything. It's not like anyone else was there to judge me. I had judged myself, and I sat in the chair, in this armchair that I have, and I write a lot of poetry and contemplate and think about it's Dad's chair at home. And I sat in that chair probably for the next hour and cried and asked God for help. And I wrote this piece. And I know that there are times, and men, if you're listening to this, and ladies, maybe it's the same for you, but there are so many guys that I know, men, that are really just trying their best to be good dads. And I think quite often our desire is we want to be perfect dads. We actually want to be perfect dads. And in this moment where I felt like just a piece of shit and the worst dad, even though compared to what other dads do and abuse their children with, this is low on that scale for me. This was still something that was like, oh man, I put enmity between my son and myself. I didn't make the situation any better. That was my thinking. I could have handled it so much different. And there was this moment where I recalled my dad doing the same thing a couple times. It was never constant, and it was rare that he would give me a whack on the arm or something like that. And I realized, you know what, Dave, there's no such thing as a perfect dad. And I didn't have one, because no such man exists, because a child does not exist. And if there's going to be an improvement, it's generational. And if I hear stories about my dad's dad and how he would treat or discipline my dad, my dad eased off. It didn't perpetuate. In fact, it got better. It was gentler and kinder and more patient. And I think, again, in my intentionality, it's getting more kinder and patient and gentler as well. And maybe when both my sons, father their children, it'll be kinder and gentler as well. Because you can't fix it in one generation. It's hardwired into our DNA, and I'm convinced that God gets it. And He forgives. He has already forgiven. And I think so much of the struggle comes to us as dads when we know we have royally screwed up in big or small ways, that we just there's a temptation just to slump into I'm the worst dad, or there's a temptation to cover it up as if it's nothing. And I think both sides of that, both extremes of victim or denial are dangerous. So to sit in the middle with a sense of self-awareness, I think is probably a healthier place to be. And then at a place of admittance and self-forgiveness. So later on that day, when Willem came home. I came home a bit later from the office that day, and before he went to bed, I said to him, "Hey buddy, I'm sorry how this morning went. You didn't deserve to be hit like that. I just know that you're not aware of how strong you are, and your brother's not going to hit you back that hard, and you have to know that it hurts as well. But you didn't deserve it. There may have been another way to do it." And he looked at me and just shrugged it off in a way, not as if it didn't matter, just as if he'd forgiven and he got it. And he said, "Nah, I deserved it, Dad." I said, "No, you didn't, son. Fathers shouldn't hit their kids." I said, "Do you forgive me?" He said, "Yeah." Kids can be so forgiving, and he was quicker to forgive and understand the situation, I realized, than I was in my non-proud moment. But that's where this poem came from. I wanted to share some of that background for some dads out there who need encouragement. And with that in mind, I want to read this piece again. You didn't have a perfect dad, because such a man does not exist. Because such a child does not exist, and every dad was once the child of an imperfect man who was also once a child. No, there is no excuse for abuse, but there is room for growth, and it never all happens in one man. It's generational, situational, environmental, accidental, and intentional. Dads, if you are holding on to shame and regrets and what-ifs and oh shits, let it go. Forgive yourself. Be gracious to you. Your sins have most likely punished you enough. No need to beat yourself up more. And children, adult children reading this, let's be adults and let it go. Acknowledge the effort. Seek the gold. Accept the failings of your imperfect parent and forgive him. For in doing so, you can accept your failings and find freedom to fail again into a better future. Thanks for listening to this podcast. It's available on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, davidtensen.com, and also on our Patreon page, patreon.com/leaderheart, where you can find more stuff and support us through a monthly donation. If you are listening to this on iTunes, I would really appreciate a rating and a review. It would really help get the word out there. Till next time, shalom.